While I love responding to y'all's hot takes over here on this channel, every once in a while going into every season, I like to make a couple of bold predictions slash hot takes for myself. So here are my 5 bold predictions for the 2025 NBA season. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and give us a like and subscribe to the channel. We're trying to hit 200K by the end of the year. And if you are over on Spotify, give us a follow and a 5-star review. That is also much appreciated. If you want to enjoy this as an audio only experience, that link will be in the description. Hey, real quick, sorry to interrupt the beginning of the video, but there is a new main channel video on, well, the main channel. It's going to be the top link in the description. Pin comment, all that. Go check it out if you want. It's about the rise and fall of super teams, kind of what super teams are and why the last few years, teams that have tried it have failed. So yeah, that's linked in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Continue on, other Jacob. Here are my 5 bold predictions. Starting off at number 5, I have the Charlotte Hornets will make the playoffs. I don't know the release order that's going to end up happening here, but if you did end up watching my who will be the surprise team of 2025 video, the team that I ended up picking was the Charlotte Hornets. I think that LaMelo Ball is kind of a sleeping monster lying in wake to actually shock a lot of people in the NBA. He is statistically a net positive on the floor with the Charlotte Hornets, despite the fact that the Hornets have not been a good roster for his entire career. He's not been healthy, and this take is pretty much entirely predicated on the prospect of him actually finally being healthy. So bear that in mind. But if we got 60 games, even just 60 games out of LaMelo Ball, I am very, very confident that they could end up making a playoff spot in an Eastern Conference that is really top heavy, but not too strong on the bottom tiers of the playoff spots. I'm expecting a second-year leap out of Brandon Miller, who was phenomenal to close the year, averaging over 20 points per game without LaMelo. I think the fit there is pretty much flawless, with Brandon Miller being a secondary shot creator and a huge catch and shoot threat. And then Mark Williams as their big man at the 5 does all the big man stuff super well. I think they have a good role player in Grant Williams, and they have a couple of other guys who are interesting. I think Trey Mann could end up being a really high-powered 6-man because he played well while he was there. So I do think that Charlotte has a lot of upside going into the year. It is still, though, heavily predicated on LaMelo Ball not having ankles made out of glass. Predicting injuries is a quick way to losing your mind because it's fucking impossible to predict something like that. It just feels right. Like, there's only so many years in a row that the guy can only play 30 games. Surely with the law of averages, things will bounce back and he'll finally be healthy again. Or maybe the Ball brothers are just fucking cursed to be eternally injured all the time to prevent them from displaying their truly impressive basketball talent. Speaking of guys with glass ankles early in their career, number 4, I have Stephen Curry trade rumors will start and gain genuine momentum. There have been some discussions about trades with Steph. I actually made a whole video on the matter because there were recently comments from Steph about the fact that the Warriors roster right now kind of bleak. He said while he does hope to be a Warrior for his entire career, the NBA is also a crazy place, and he also doesn't exactly seem thrilled about the prospect of playing non-competitive basketball for the rest of his playing days. So if the roster is as bleak as I expect it to be going into next year, I really don't think Jonathan Kuminga is going to save anything. I don't think Clay being gone is all that much of a positive. Obviously, he had some issues with what he was doing within the offense, but I also think a lot of those issues stemmed from the fact that they didn't really have anybody else who could do some shot creating. So now there's a void there. They brought in Buddy Hield, who can be a 3-point threat in the same way that Klay Thompson can, just given that he's not been as good of a 3-point shooter as earlier in his career, you know, below 40% from 3, like some sort of plebeian. But he is indeed a great 3-point shooter, and I do think that Buddy Hield can replicate that well enough, but not enough that it's going to make the team any better. I don't think the Warriors are going to make the playoffs this next coming season, despite the fact that Stephen Curry is Stephen Curry. And I think at the age that he is at, he might look towards greener pastures. Rather, he doesn't necessarily have to outright say anything, But if the team's just bad and he has a couple of like, you know, clips of him not looking happy on the bench, that's all it really takes for these rumors to start. And I imagine with those rumors starting, there will be a lot of NBA teams monitoring the guy. And when I say gain genuine momentum, I mean that discussions might actually be had. Now, by no means do I expect this to be a trade deadline type of move. I imagine that would come in the offseason, but I do think that the actual discussion and the prospect of it will become very real. When I made the video about Steph potentially ending up somewhere else, a lot of you guys were like, no, that could never happen. He would never leave the Warriors. But I'm telling you guys, he left the door open for the first time in his entire career at a time where it couldn't make more sense for him to finally actually leave that door open. I'm not saying when there's smoke, there is fire, but it smells like smoke to me. Just a little bit. Enough that I do think that there is a very real prospect that Stephen Curry ends up being on the trade block. Moving on to number 3, the Dallas Mavericks are going to have the greatest offense in NBA history. Now, something that's important to note about this is essentially the only thing that I am arguing here is that the Mavericks will have the best offense in the NBA. And I don't know if that's that bold, because statistically speaking, the number 1 offense in the NBA pretty much every single year now ends up being statistically the best offense of all time. However, given that in this previous year, the NBA started, you know, officiating a little bit differently, held the whistle a little bit more, and defense just started to matter a little bit more as the season went along. I don't know if that pattern of greatest offense will continue, but if it does, I do think it will be the Dallas Mavericks that do it. If there was any major flaw that I would assign to the Mavericks, it's that they don't have enough movement beyond Luka or Kyrie with the ball in their hands. Luka or Kyrie with or without the ball are drawing a ton of attention from the defense, but a lot of their offensive sets would come down to Luka is going to take us somewhere or Kyrie is going to isolate against this guy. And that still resulted in a top offense in the league because the Mavericks are ridiculously talented. Luka and Kyrie is about as talented as a backcourt as it gets. However, everybody else just kind of standing there. Derrick Jones just kind of standing in the corner. PJ Washington just kind of standing in the corner. Obviously, their big man would be used in screen action a lot, but if that wasn't happening and it was just a pure ISO, they're essentially just standing around the dunker spot. But I think adding Klay Thompson adds a dynamic to that offense that is so valuable beyond what Klay's actual ability is. So I mentioned that, yeah, Klay has fallen off in many regards. He's not the defender he used to be. He takes bad shots a lot. He's not as good at hitting those off the dribble shots. I know a lot of people think of Klay as purely this off-ball guy, the 60 points on 4 dribbles or whatever the fuck it was. And obviously that is where he got a majority of his offense in the past, but he also had no qualms with like a 1 dribble into a mid-range pull-up or the occasional post fadeaway or an attack off the catch drive to the rim. All that kind of stuff he got notably worse at. Not a good playmaker, never has been, and not a good defender, has been, but not so much anymore. But one thing about Klay's game that has stuck with him is his 3-point shooting is still some of the best in the NBA. His percentage is a little bit lower than at the peak of his career, but his volume is as high as it has ever been. What's important is it's not just stand still, catch and shoots. The guy comes off of down screens. The guy does the JJ Redick style of 3-pointer, which is like, damn, bro's falling over, but he's still shooting it and it still fucking goes in. That ability, the off-ball movement dynamic to that offense means that their defense can't just stand still and wait to help on a Luka drive or a Kyrie mid-range ISO. Like, they can't just bring that help and be like, okay, Derrick Jones or PJ, if you hit it, you hit it. Not only would they not want to bring that help just on a standstill 3-pointer, but also because Klay is running around all the fucking time, these guys are focused on chasing him more than they're focused on bringing help on Luka or Kyrie. So I do think that he will add that dynamic to the offense, a level of unguardability to it, where previously, even though Dallas had a very difficult to guard offense, it was difficult to guard purely because of Luka and Kyrie's one-on-one ability. But now, just because there's going to be a little bit of movement happening, that could definitely open things up to a degree where in the regular season, I don't know if there's much that teams are going to be able to do about it. And I would hope, whether it be systematically because the coach decides and recognizes that this is how they need to do things, or whether it be just Klay's off-ball movement rubbing off on other players. If PJ Washington moved a little bit more, did some more cutting action, it wasn't just simply standing in the corner all the time, things like that, that would make a big difference. Gafford or Lively are going to be involved in that pick and roll pretty regularly. If it's more Dereck Lively very capable of making those short roll reads where Daniel Gafford is not. Combine all of that together, you have Lively or Gafford rolling to the basket, you have Luka or Kyrie isolating, and you have PJ Washington, who's a good corner shooter threat. Hopefully he can be a good cut threat as well. He has definitely displayed an ability to do that. And then, not just a cut threat, but also an attack off of the catch, pump fake, lose your man, drive inside, capable of finishing through contact, all of that kind of stuff. You add that, and then Klay Thompson running around like a madman. I certainly wouldn't want to have to guard that offense, and I think as a result it will be the best in the NBA. And depending on the landscape of the NBA at this time, if we see the offensive trend of the league the past couple of years take a dip, or if it continues that upward trajectory that we've been seeing, if that upward trajectory continues, greatest offense the NBA has ever seen. To that point, I'm sure it will be topped soon after. I think Dallas could be deadly on offense. Now, how they can be on defense, what that means for their overall regular season standing, what that means for them in the postseason, that's a different conversation. That will be in my video discussing contenders. But number one offense in the NBA, maybe the best ever. Moving on to number 2, my take is the Memphis Grizzlies will be a top 2 seed in the Western Conference. This is another one like the Hornets take, heavily predicated on health. Of course, health is a factor in basically any of these takes. You know, Klay Thompson could tear his ACL and miss the entire season, and that immediately makes that Mavericks take a wash. But I do think that the Grizzlies have one of the best starting lineups in the entire NBA. Now, the 3 position is a little bit fuzzy as to who they'll actually go with, whether it be GG Jackson or Vince Williams or Marcus Smart even. Rudy told me the other day that Marcus Smart at the 3 might actually be something that they explore. I don't know how valid that is. I do think that he can actually defend most 3s, which is nuts because he's only 6'4", but you know, dude's been known to be able to defend big men in the post, so can probably defend most forwards. I don't know that I necessarily want to go that direction when you're facing the Kevin Durants of the world, but it is plausible. But regardless of who it may be, whether it's GG, whether it's Vince, whether it's Marcus, you're getting a starting lineup. I'm going to go with GG in this case because I do think that's who they'll go with because it adds extra size. He's 6'9", has shown some defensive versatility, and offensively, as long as his 3 ball is going in, that paired with his ability as an on-ball creator could actually bring another dynamic to that offense that's super deadly. But assuming it's GG, that starting lineup is going to be Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, GG Jackson, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Zach Edey. Let's talk about Zach real quick because he's a controversial player, but I think most people have agreed that Memphis is actually a really good spot for the guy because he's not going to be asked to do too much, but he's also not going to be asked to do too little. He has a very defined role on this team as a starter, where you probably couldn't find that on a lot of other NBA teams, and if it was a defined role as a starter on some other NBA teams, they'd probably be asking him to do stuff like he was doing in college. And from what I understand, while there are aspects of his game from college that will translate to the NBA, a lot of people are looking him as like a roided up Ivica Zubac type of thing, and I can see that for sure. Just being a comically large big man who rebounds the ball really well, which is very key because rebounding was the biggest problem for the Grizzlies in recent years because Jaren is just a non-threat as a rebounder, but brings in the rebounds, good finishing inside. I expect him to be a strong paint finisher right out of the gate. And I think that's all they really need out of that 5 spot. Not to mention, he's a good defender. He's a big body around the rim. What I would compare it to defensively between their bigs is Giannis and Brook Lopez when those two are at their best. Zach Edey, the Brook Lopez in this equation, is just so damn big that you just put him in front of the rim and he's automatically a huge obstacle. He doesn't even really have to do anything, but then you add on to that the fact that he can be a pretty damn good shot blocker, and that's already a huge threat. But then on top of that, after you've run into that big fucking body, you have to worry about Jaren Jackson Jr. coming and blocking you on the weak side, which is, you know, what Giannis's role was paired next to Giannis. Like, Zach Edey takes the initial physicality of the matchup, and then Jaren uses his defensive talent and tactfulness to just send the shot into the third row. So I think the Grizzlies will be one of the best defenses in the NBA, regardless of who they end up going with as that forward. They're going to have good defensive players off of the bench. GG's probably the worst defender of their forward options, but Vince Williams showed himself to be a really good 3-and-D player last year, and Marcus Smart is Marcus Smart, you know, one of the most fraudulent defensive player of the years in the history of this league, but still a very good defender, and was at least in DPOY conversations for understandable reasons. I truly think that the year that he won DPOY was just like a no clear candidate type of situation, and then the voters panicked and they were like, fuck, Marcus Smart, I guess. Even though there were literally better defensive players on his own team, defensively they should be able to bring it pretty substantially. They're going to have a lot of defensive talent off of the bench and plenty in the starting lineup. And then Ja Morant is a player that I think a lot of people have forgot how fucking good he is. He's not the most efficient in the world. His true shooting percentage has always been around league average, where you want it to be better than average for a player with his level of volume. 3-ball still not the most reliable thing in the world, even though he has taken major strides in that department. I do think somewhere where he has improved a lot, where he hasn't gotten a lot of credit, is in the mid-range. Not a great mid-range shooter, but a league average efficiency one, while taking a relatively high volume. Also really good in the floater area, and that is huge because it makes it harder for you to sag off on him. Not to mention, you don't necessarily want to sag off all that much because it gives him the power and the room to explode. Ja, I think, is going to surprise a lot of people. I think he's probably going to be a top 5 MVP candidate, if not higher than that. Desmond Bane, I think, is the perfect secondary scoring option. I think Jaren brings a lot of dynamic to that offense. GG Jackson, shot creation, 3-ball. His percentage on the 3-ball was not amazing, but he did some on-ball creating with it, which I don't necessarily think is going to be super prevalent when he is in the offense with everybody there. Obviously, there was a lot of like, somebody has to score the ball, so I guess it's going to be GG. So he does, you know, it's a little bit of a question how good he's actually going to be in that context. And to some extent, you can say the same thing about Vince Williams. I have the utmost confidence that this roster is going to work, that those guys are going to adjust and play better in a winning system rather than a worse counting stats but better efficiency type of thing. I think the Grizzlies are going to be a top 2 seed, potentially even the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. Now, there are still a couple of teams that I would take over the Grizzlies in that conference, really 2 specifically. I think I like Dallas and OKC more than them in a postseason setting, but honestly, you could convince me that they could beat anybody in that conference, especially if Ja just comes out of the gate amazing. But my last take, speaking of the OKC Thunder, I think Oklahoma is going to be the title favorite going into the 2025 playoffs. And I mean, like, the odds, like the Vegas odds going in will be most people have OKC as the winner. Now, I recognize, given my track record of being a Celtics hater, that that's automatically going to make people go, okay, well, you're just being a Celtics hater. Maybe, to a degree. I won't deny that that's partially in there, maybe. But it's more about the trend in the NBA in recent years. That trend being repeat championships just don't happen. Now, a big part of the reason why those repeat champions don't end up happening is because Well, they end up losing a lot of guys in free agency. Bruce Brown with the Denver Nuggets, 2022. The Warriors lost a lot of people, not to mention just regressed in certain areas. 2021, the Bucks lost PJ Tucker, who ended up being a really huge contributor to that team. Boston brought everybody back. I recognize that, but I still feel as though their title run was against opponents that were not all that impressive. Meanwhile, I feel like the Eastern Conference has gotten notably better. Meanwhile, if I'm looking in the West, OKC obviously got significantly better. That's why I'm big on them. I think the Mavericks got better with Klay Thompson, and the Grizzlies got better just by virtue of health. But I really don't think the Nuggets or the Timberwolves got all that much better. I do think that OKC improved more than anybody in this offseason, even more than like Philly getting Paul George, because yeah, OKC didn't land a player as good as Paul George, but they landed some key role players in Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein, and most importantly, they got rid of their biggest weakness by far, which was Josh Giddey, who had no fucking place on that team but continued to start for no goddamn reason. I'm also expecting some improvement internally. Aaron Wiggins should improve. Chet Holmgren should improve. J-Dub should improve. I think J-Dub will probably finally pass that like 20 point per game mark. He was at like 18, 19 this year. Chet probably could get into the 20 point per game range as well, while being one of the best defensive players in the entire NBA. I also think that him at the 4 with Hartenstein, I don't know how often they're going to actually go to those lineups, how often they're going to want to play Chet at the 5, and how well that will pair together, but I think it'll pair well because Chet is a strong enough floor spacer that it works on offense, and then defensively, I feel like more often than not, you'll end up being able to put Chet on essentially the worst offensive player on the floor. Against some teams, the worst offensive player on the floor is still going to be too talented that you can't really get away with that. But like, think of Denver and what happened with Denver this previous year versus Minnesota. I think Minnesota, or I think OKC can replicate exactly that, where you put Chet on Aaron Gordon, you put Hartenstein on Jokic, and then you just have Chet help off of Aaron Gordon and dare him to shoot 3-pointers like constantly. I like this roster a lot. I think they'll improve a lot. I think they improved a lot depth-wise, but also they get the benefit of improvement internally more so than just about any other NBA team, on top of the fact that they added some truly S-tier role players to this roster and got rid of their biggest problem. If I were to soften the take, I would say OKC is the favorite to win the West, but honestly, I think there's a real shot that this narrative ends up prevailing and people will go, okay, well, OKC doesn't have the burden of a playoff run from last year on them, and they also don't have what appears to be the curse of the potential three-peat champion. So that's my boldest, hottest take here, but I honestly feel really strongly about it. Going over them real quick, my 5th take, the Charlotte Hornets will make the playoffs. Number 4, Stephen Curry trade rumors will start and gain genuine momentum. 3, the Dallas Mavericks will have the greatest offense in NBA history. 2, the Memphis Grizzlies will be a top 2 seed in the West. And number 1, OKC will be the title favorites going into the 2025 playoffs. Let me know what you think of my bold takes, and let me know what some of your bold takes are in the description. In the comment. That's it. Shout out to Nick for editing this video. Shout out to you for watching it. But that is it. Goodbye.